People are thinking because they have a tough decision. So of course they're going to make more mistakes because the decision is tough.
If you just didn't get dealt aces in the game of poker, for most players, it would actually be impossible for them to be winning.
If your pieces are positioned in such a way that you have a good move, then there's a really good chance that your pieces are positioned in a way for there to be a great move. You know,
Hey guys, welcome back to the Seeking Balance podcast. This week we have Jen Shahade. I was really excited to speak with Jen. I've heard a lot from her over the years. She is a 3-time national chess champion. She's an author. She wrote the books Play Like a Girl, Chess Queens, and her new book, which comes out this spring, is called Thinking Sideways: How to Think Like a Chess Player and Win at Life. There were so many great points that we covered. We talk about using breadth instead of depth to make better decisions, how an intermezzo plays into decision making, and how when you have a good move in mind, it's actually a great opportunity to look for a better one. It was great talking with Jen, and I hope to talk with her again. And I now bring you Jen Shahade. Jen, hello. Thank you so much for being here.
thank you for having me. Hello.
Yes, I'm so excited to talk to you. Yeah, you're in poker, but also very out of poker. So I'm excited to talk about all the things that you're up to these days.
Yeah, that's right. Insider, outsider. That's kind of my thing.
Yeah. Well, for everyone who is not familiar with it, how would you describe what it is you do these days? Like what are you up to?
Well, these days I do a lot of writing, speaking, and poker playing, I suppose. But different years are different. Like I have also played chess professionally, and I've done all sorts of things in the chess field. And then some years I'm more into like podcast and producing. So kind of every year is a little bit different. But I guess 2025 and 2026, it's a lot about like spreading the good word of chess thinking and poker thinking and playing.
Mm. So you see, you do a lot of like speaking engagements these days.
Yeah, and like I like speaking to all sorts of audiences. Really, I like speaking to like corporate audiences, but I've also like, especially in chess, I've done tons of work with children, where I speak to them about the game of chess, and sometimes I do something where I play 20 or 30 of them at once. We call that a simultaneous. So yeah, I don't necessarily speak to young audiences in poker because of the age restriction, but I feel like I do like speaking to like college audiences and things about poker. Yeah.
I had to, I randomly got hired to speak to like a high school baseball team about
Oh,
performance. And
nice.
I was fascinated by how unprepared I was to talk to like high school age kids. Like it became very clear to me the moment I started talking to them that I had not thought about the difference in talking to a group of like younger people and speaking to like adults about it, because boy did they not care what I was saying.
Really? Really, how
Yeah.
old? Were they like 13 and 14?
Probably like 15, like somewhere in there. They were like listening, but you could tell mostly because they were told to listen.
Okay. Okay. See, that surprises me a little bit, but I do think you ran into a tough age group, and also maybe the cliquishness of like what type of atmosphere was it that you were speaking to them in?
Yeah, I don't think they were aware that I was going to be there. So like, right? So I don't think they weren't prepared was one. Number two, I was talking about performance. What I learned is that typically when I talk with people who are kind of already like high performers, I can speak obviously more like kind of abstractly and kind of vaguely about what I think it takes to perform better and the kind of problems that I think come up. It was very clear as soon as I started talking to them that the way I was talking about it was just it wasn't grounded or salient enough for them. Like they weren't, I didn't think they were really sure what I was saying. If that makes sense.
Yeah, interesting, because I do think that one of the things that I think young people like about me is that I talk to them like they're really smart and kind of more grown up. Like especially like really little kids, like third and fourth graders. It's actually amazing the things that they can come up with them if you treat them like they're already, human beings with like ideas and thoughts and dreams.
Sure, sure,
Uh,
sure.
and yeah, a lot of the best teachers are really good at like pulling that out of young people. But I think you're right. It's very much about context. Cause like if they're like expecting to like hang out with their buddies and suddenly they're like, oh, here's the performance coach. It's really bad. Yeah.
I just needed more things to capture. My takeaway was like to capture their attention. Like I spoke for a long time about what I thought was kind of vague and abstract things. And it wasn't so much. I think what you're saying would be really true if I was doing more one-on-one stuff with them, but I was kind of just there talking to a group. And I don't know. I don't want to linger too much on this, but yeah, I definitely wish I would have just involved more. Like I was an EOD tech, I was in the Navy. Like I wish we would have involved more interesting stories that they would have been like, that's cool, and like captured their attention. But like, I don't think I did any of that. Like I think I did basically none of that, and I learned a lot from it. But that's probably true for any audience. I don't know if that was. I've never done like. I think it was probably my first time speaking to like a large group. Period. So yeah. Um, but yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, you're doing a lot of like speaking engagements. What are the things you're trying to like get across to young kids and when you're talking to them?
Well, I think one of my big things is in chess in particular, but of course this also applies to poker. It's so difficult for people when they fail and they don't reach the goals that they set for themselves. So I do try to really emphasize the importance of process oriented goals. And I find that young people sometimes haven't really heard about it or don't really understand what it would mean as pertain to a field like chess. So that's definitely something I like to focus on. And also the fact that everybody's growth curve is different and that I myself am a great example of that because my brother was an extremely talented chess player, also later played poker professionally, and he was, much higher rated than me when I was starting to learn chess, and so I was discouraged at some points, even though my family was very encouraging. I was just, like, looking at my progress and his and like, "Well, maybe this just isn't for me," and I kind of came back into chess in large part because I started to see it from a different angle, more as like an art than a competition. And, once I started seeing those aspects of the game, of course, I got much better at the competition side. And a lot of people who I see in chess, for instance, have siblings in the game, and they so often can relate to that. Because so often their like sibling is even better than them, or maybe they have a classmate who's even better than them, and it's like it drives them crazy. And so to be able to relate to them on that topic, say that I went through it and, really kind of voice their anxiety and even sometimes jealousy and, talk about ways to work through it, I think is it's really powerful, and I feel like I'm doing a good job when I'm able to, like, speak to a kid who hasn't heard about those things before.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really, yeah. I mean, it really just drives the point. You just don't really know where things are headed in your particular trajectory, even if like different growth curves, but like, yeah, you can, the thing that you think you love can lead you. I thought I was going to be a professional blackjack player before I got into poker, for example. And like, you think, because I ran a blackjack team for a while, but like, yeah, you never know what's in going to lead you from one thing to the next. In your story, also, though, I don't know if you feel this way about it. Also, it also strikes me just the relevance of finding like your own way in something, because you said it didn't really click with you until it was less competitive and more art, and then you got better at the competitive side. I could see, depending on who you are, the opposite being true. If you're naturally competitive, it might bring out the art side, but like finding your own inroads into something that really resonates with you, I think is so important. I think a lot of people are trying to like resonate the path of someone else that they, or the path that they think they should be doing.
Exactly. I completely agree with that. And that's also something I talk about in Thinking Sideways that it's better not to think too far ahead in life or in chess because that can sometimes interfere with your flexibility. I mean, obviously, there are exceptions to that. There always are. But I think overall, it's good to be ready to improvise. Certainly true in poker. I mean, the amount of ideas that you can memorize, but then when you're sitting at the table, if you're too tied to them, it's going to really trip you up. And same thing with chess. Like, I mean, in poker, the cliche would be like, what do you do with ace king? And in chess, the version of that would be like, what's better, a knight or a bishop? It's like, this is these questions, like these questions are at once both. And on one hand, you can say that's a bad question, it's a silly question, but also it's like the ultimate question. But the problem is there's no answer. You just have to keep asking it over and over and over again. It's like the forever question is like the worst and the best question at once.
Yeah, you sent me ahead of this podcast like some of the points that you talk about in Thinking Sideways. I have to say, I got through. They're so fascinating that I made it through four of what are maybe 10 or 15. before I felt like just so overwhelmed because each one feels like it could be a book in itself. Like, so the one you just mentioned, which is like, thinking too much, too far ahead. And the difference between like thinking on breadth versus depth is what's kind of talked about here. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
That one's, like, basically the inspiration for the title of the book, and Thinking Sideways, and, look, the reason that that one is crucial to be the core of the book is that it's, like, a counterintuitive insight because people think of chess players as, like, really far ahead thinkers. They're like, "Oh, you can see 20 moves ahead," and, yeah, I mean, once in a while that happens, but the large majority of the time, it's about being ready to improvise and make the move that your opponent didn't expect.
Well, and it's fascinating because I think when you're talking about like not seeing far ahead, but you're thinking about considering other moves and the one obvious to you, I think the natural kind of question that can come up is like, well, how do you evaluate moves if not thinking deeply about each one? Um, because like because you're like, well, you could obviously think very deep down a particular decision tree, or you can think wide down, like kind of like you're saying against it. But again, I guess what comes to my mind is, well, wouldn't you have to think deeply down each of the moves you're considering to be able to consider them, against each other? I'm not sure if I'm being
Well
clear.
well, yeah, but not like 20 moves ahead. But yeah,
I see. Yeah, yeah.
it'd be better to think like 5 moves, 3 moves ahead at each. Like, it'd be better to look at 5 different moves, 3 moves ahead each than to look 15 moves straight ahead. Because you're seeing things that are much more likely to happen. Because if you're looking 10, 12 moves in the future or the years, months in the future, there's so many things that could happen that would make all of the rest of your thinking move. And I think that's really true in chess and life. So it's possible things will go according to plan and then everything is great. But if they don't, everything you looked at is wasted. Whereas if you're looking at more moves, fewer moves ahead, then a lot of the times those things that you looked at can be useful later. And it's more likely that what you looked at will actually take place. But I think from like a performance point of view, what really strikes me about this whole concept of thinking sideways is also it really puts a very big value on presence. And the idea that we need to be present at the poker table, at the chess table, in life, and not think that we can, show up knowing exactly what's going to happen and that we can out prepare. You can't out prepare presence. You have to be present. And I think that's sometimes frustrating to people. That's why they wanna know, like, what do you do with ace king? What hope hands do you open from the hijack with this stack depth? They wanna know so that they don't have to think about it in game because thinking is hard. In fact, there's a famous quote by a grandmaster, hilarious grandmaster Jan Gustafsson, who said, "Chess is a constant battle between my desire to win and my desire not to think."
That's funny. No, that I mean that's makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, I think it emphasizes this quality of like responsiveness as opposed to like planning. Like, I think one of the things, especially, I mean, this is true within poker because it's very common that I find people trying to think about like turn and river situations when it's like there's a lot of different things. There's a lot of different turns you can get and a lot of different ways things can go before you end up there. And in my experience playing poker, at least, one of the best qualities has been to be very responsive to the situation. And I found that people who get carried away thinking too far ahead also won't are less likely to notice an unintuitive, let's say, like lead from out of position, like a very unintuitive mood. When the turn comes, that's like exactly right. They've already snap checked, like they've already done their routine action that they're used to doing without recognizing like, oh, this is a very unique spot that I never would have studied, but probably this unintuitive thing makes a lot of sense here. And the only way that happens is like having, like you said, like this present responsive quality to like the situation that you're in. Another weird thing that this made me think of, and I'm curious to hear your response to, is that this actually made me think of how people handle conflict in conversations. Like if you have to go have a difficult conversation with a partner or a boss or somebody, people really like to, like, if they're anxious about the conversation, like run down this conversation really deeply, thinking I think their mind and body thinks they're doing something very useful. When in reality, it's like you said, you've made so many assumptions about ways you're going to end up in this conversation. You're not preparing responses to things people might say that are just probably never going to happen. And then you're actually in a conversation that I think the experience of stress can be more when it's a situation you feel completely unprepared for, when you prepared for something else, versus when your strategy was to respond. And when your strategy was to respond in the moment, then things feel like they're happening according to plan far more often. Anyway, those are a couple
Fortunately,
of, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, fortunately, in conversations, unlike in chess and poker, like it's not necessarily a turn-based game. So, in doubt, if you feel like you're in doubt, you can always just listen more. That's but and I feel like I've had regrets in the past of that. That I was like, I wish I just like listened more and like didn't even really say much because then I could have absorbed a lot more and been more considerate about what I was going to say. Yeah, because as some of these tough conversations can indeed be very tough because you're trying to do so many things in a conversation, right? Like, absorb new information, listen, and then also create, like, your own perfect responses, and it's so tough, especially if it's, like, God forbid, recorded or via messaging or something, and so the things can all be, like, there forever. It's
Yeah,
hard.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think this speaks to the same thing though, the same quality, because you're saying like listening more. Like, I think it'd be easy to not listen when you're trying to enact a plan, right? Like if you go into a conversation with a plan in mind and an assumption about what you think is going to be said when someone means, it's that actually makes it so much easier to misunderstand somebody. But again, I think you could apply this to games and all kinds of performance, because when you go into a situation with, again, with a plan in mind, it's easy to overlook obvious things that mean you're in a different situation than you thought you were in. And this is the same quality of, like, I think you listening being so close to the idea of presence, like listening to yourself and listening to others and being present to this, like listening to reality, are just like are so like similarly linked in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, some studies they did on chess players showed that the stronger the chess player, the more they thought about their opponent ideas. And the way they measured this is actually had them speak out loud about the chess positions. And they noticed that the stronger players were mentioning more counters that their opponent could play. So basically trying to falsify their own ideas and prove why their ideas were wrong. So essentially thinking more like scientists and less like advocates. So instead, like I want to play rook f6 or I want to check raise the river, just why is this good and why is this bad and what could be wrong with this idea, and that I think is kind of intuitive, but at the same time seeing it play out to such a strong effect that there was really like just a very linear relationship between how strong the players were and how much they tried to falsify their own moves is really, I think, useful because it shows that this is valuable not only in games, also in life.
I find this interesting because I think in my experience working with poker players, I think they try to falsify their own ideas too much, if I were to guess. Like,
Yeah,
I
maybe because
think
they're so good. They're so good.
maybe I think in a game of uncertainty and a game of hidden information, I think there's a little bit different where your ability to imagine something your opponent will do, or your ability to imagine, because poker's a little odd in the sense that you're kind of trying to figure out the game state, right? Like you actually don't know the state of the game. So like right, so you, in the sense of chess, you know the state of the game. You actually know what could be a counter, right? Like you can falsify with higher certainty, I think. Um, I'm as a very recreational chess player. This is I'm saying these things, but with poker, I don't know if this is the case. I'm speaking off the cuff, but I do think there's something about the fact that if you start trying to falsify things so much because you don't have a way to reality test their plausibility, it's very easy to handcuff yourself. You could always imagine a game state where what you're doing is bad. Like you
Yeah.
always could.
Well, the other problem with poker compared to chess is that it's a timed game and people are watching you while you think in a way that can actually affect their impression of what you have. So that it's with poker, it would probably apply more to like study or practice than to actually playing. Because yeah, you probably would just play too slow. Also, if you were constantly sitting there trying to falsify your plans on every every street. But in chess, we have a lot of time sometimes in a chess game, so
Yeah, that makes
it's
sense.
you can really, like, dig deep, especially in certain positions, because in chess, unlike in poker where you have well, I guess it kinda similar in poker where you have, like, shot clocks and you decide how long to think in various scenarios. In chess, it's, like, kind of a more extreme version of that because you could literally think for 1 hour and 20 minutes on one move and then play all your other moves instantly. So you can really divvy it up in a very lopsided way based on when you think is the most important situation. And some people have suggested using this in poker, by the way, because they don't like the way that the current format allows you to, for instance, think for the full 15 seconds pre-flop and 30 seconds or 29 seconds post-flop, and that it doesn't reward people who actually play, like, in 2 seconds in those intervals. And so that if you use some kind of chess clock method, it would reward those people with more time for the tough decisions, by rewarding them for playing, like, instantly pre-flop instead of spending an entire 15 seconds. So I think that's actually kind of an interesting argument, and I do think it would be nice to have that option.
If you're tired of trying many of the same things time and time again and not reaching the level that you know you're capable of reaching, my one on one coaching is definitely for you. I've worked with a ton of players, many of them great, many of them just beginning, and many of them have put a ton of work into a single thing or a handful of things, being sure it's going to be the thing that causes them success without realizing that there are many subtler, less obvious things they need to work on in order to reach the levels that they can. So if you've been grinding your gears, spending time in solvers, putting in hours, reviewing hands, and you still don't feel like you're reaching your potential, reach out to me. We'll have an intro call and maybe one on one coaching is right for you. Click the link below to learn more. Do you think, is there conversation in chess between like people who have, this is a kind of a metacognition thing, but better or worse guesses at which spots are better to spend their time on? Like, because I could imagine there could be a skill, it's like a meta skill of knowing what is an actually good move to spend a lot of time on versus what is not.
Oh,
uh,
yeah. Yeah, that is a really important skill, like, in chess, like, vernacularly, we call it, like, finding the critical moment, right? And yeah, better players are, of course, better at that. But one interesting thing is that there's this cliche that you have in both chess and poker: wrong think, long think, meaning that like when you tank, you often make the wrong decision. In both chess and poker. And, I dug in a little bit to this chess cliche because it never really sounded completely right to me. Now, I'm more of a slow thinker. All the titles I won in chess were in classical formats. So I didn't quite buy this. And indeed, if you look at the data, what really happens is that people are thinking because they have a tough decision. So of course they're going to make more mistakes because the decision is tough. It's not the think that made them. Actually, if anything, it just shows that they're playing smart because they realize that it's a hard decision. And so they're trying to think their way out of it. And a lot of times it's so difficult that even thinking hard doesn't help them. But it's not that thinking is what caused the bad move. And yeah, I think that's also analogous to poker in many cases as well.
yeah, I think there's also something to be said of just like the emotional salient of a long decision where you come up with the wrong one is going to be like, it's going to feel worse. And I think that people do not have a great way of like relating to themselves in those moments. Like I think when you're in a really tough decision where it feels like a tough decision and it feels really important to you, it's very hard to have a relationship with yourself in a reality that says like this thing is really going to matter to me. I'm going to spend a lot of time on it and I'm often going to be wrong because this is a tough spot that is confusing. And I think very few people just like feel that way of just like, well, yeah, I will be wrong here a lot. That's why I'm spending a lot of time on this decision, right? And then just kind of like make a decision and it's wrong and they move on. Most people, they imagine that spending a lot of time on this means I will come to a good decision, as opposed to like I'm going to carefully consider a very difficult decision that by the nature of it, I'm often going to be wrong on.
I agree with that, but I'm not sure the alternative is that much better, like making a snap decision and being wrong, because then you're gonna be like, "Oh, I should have thought longer. Maybe I would have come up with the right decision." So either way, I think making a mistake is always gonna be hard, and you can, like, look at it from either perspective. But that is a good point that it is kind of, like, hard to cope with, spending a lot of energy on a decision and still messing it up because you're like, "Oh, I got the worst of both worlds." I, like, drained my energy and I made the bad move or made the wrong play. Absolutely.
Oh yeah, this is actually so that's I've worked with some players who we've worked with time bank strategy and we've worked on this kind of meta skill of like assessing how much in EV is it actually worth me to spend on this decision? Like is it, if this is a really hard decision and I time bank for a really long time and this would be kind of complicated to talk about how you could tell the difference, but and my time is going to move the needle of the quality of my decision by like a percent. But these time banks, like I think there are different problems, and there are different situations where your time can actually lead you to a good decision. And this is largely trusting intuition, but I think there's a lot of spots where people know the time is not worth that much to them, and yet they still spend a lot of time on it because they can't emotionally accept sooner that they're not going to get clarity on this decision. And they spend that time trying to pursue clarity on a decision they know they're not going to find. And that is a torch. But the situations that are worth it, um, are really important to find. But I think that skill is interesting, and I think it's largely intuitive. Like it's largely this like feeling in the moment of like, do I really know that I'm not going to have a clear decision, and I'm just going to try to find one, or do I actually have a way of moving through this in a way that might actually lend to some clarity? And I think I do think experienced players have a way of sensing the difference.
I love that. I love that you work with your clients on time bank management because one of the things that really annoys me is that in poker, we don't give it enough of especially from the mainstream. I don't think it gets enough credit for being this mind sport and this discipline worthy of scientific attention that is, a model for good decision making. Despite like the many like, successful books and, poker players that have shown it is. Because in chess, I'm telling you, for thinking sideways, I read like probably 100 studies that were related to chess and decision making that were commissioned by major universities, right? Or that were co-authored by professors from universities all over the world. And there were very, very few poker related studies. There just aren't that many. And I think it's a shame because poker is kind of this treasure chest of decision making under pressure for money that I think would actually reveal some really interesting truths about, like you say, using time and diminishing returns. And one thing I come to the conclusion of with this long think, wrong think thing is that it's not really long think, wrong think, it's long think, diminishing returns. Although that is a lot less sexy of a saying. I
it
mean,
doesn't it doesn't rhyme, so
no.
that's definitely true. I mean, it's interesting to think about too, because it's interesting. Anyway, that there's a lot of ideas about this kind of imagined like graph of diminishing returns where you could, when unsure about the use of your time, you could probably find an average sweet spot of like, well, I'm going to spend this long on it, and like this, and much longer is probably not worth it. But uh, I'm curious about this term intermezzo, that is Italian for in between move, because I read this and it didn't sink in quite what is meant by this. This is can you talk about this a little?
Well, in Intermezzo, sometimes it's called as Zwischenzug, which is the German term for it. But for some reason, that one caught on in chess. The Zwischenzug and the Intermezzo in English are known as in between move or intermediate move. These are like surprise moves that your opponent doesn't notice because the normal response or the expected response is more straightforward. So, like, suppose I take your queen. I'm expecting you to take my queen back. I'm not really looking at anything else. It's kind of like a natural tunnel vision moment, right? And then if you actually don't recapture my queen and do something different, it's like often shocking. And those moves rarely win because they're the exceptions to the rule. But when you reach a high level, you need to find those exceptions to rules because you're not going to win by the ordinary. And so intermezzo is one of those tactics that really shows up all the way to Magnus Carlsen. A lot of tactics, like for instance, like a pin or something. I mean, every master player is going to see a pin, but an intermezzo is really like a grandmaster tactic. Like they could miss one. They could easily miss it. And then I think as it applies to life, it's also often used as like a musical interlude and this kind of idea that instead of making a decision, you can delay a decision in a way that gives you more information. Sometimes people use it to refer to certain times of life in between. There's a best-selling novel by Sally Rooney, called Intermezzo. And yeah, it's pretty good. It's about chess as well.
Mm. And so yeah, the example you have is like making a decision, like buying, like people like investing in A or B, and there's like a actually rent one for longer. And so You know what's interesting? Because when you're talking about the chess example and this correlation between time, is would an example of this be to like, are there examples in chess where this it does both of these, where you can delay? Like, for example, I can imagine you could check somebody before capturing, recapturing, and seeing
Yeah.
what happens, right? Like, and seeing what happens in that, watch that engagement play out before you make the decision whether or not you're going to recapture the queen or something like that. Is that kind of like an idea as well, or
Yeah, it's oftentimes a check that somebody didn't notice because they're like, "Oh, like, of course he's just gonna recapture my queen, and then I'm gonna play, this move," and then suddenly you make a check or a move on the other side of the board that I didn't notice. Yeah.
right, right, or like is forcing something else to happen? That's yeah, that's pretty fascinating. It's interesting to me because it really is something that is purely it is purely like, I don't know, I can't think of another word for this, but like human narrative based. Like, the only way for a decision to be surprising is to first have this pre idea of what like should happen, right? Like, if you don't have that, if all decisions are considered the same in a vacuum, like if you're just thinking through all decisions similarly, this is such an interesting it's such an interesting idea, because it really there's to me it feels very interlinked with human psychology in a way that other strategic ideas aren't, like, because you could imagine
Yeah.
expanding this idea to all kind of domains where people have expectations that might be unique to them, or might be unique to certain cultures, or all kinds of things that really have nothing to it would be easy to overlook if not bringing that aspect into it.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of like a way to interrupt tunnel vision. So you're like taking advantage of your opponent's tunnel vision, basically. That they're expecting this, and then you do something unexpected, and it throws them off, right? In a zero sum game, that can be really valuable. And of course, in poker, you see. I mean, I don't think it's a really perfect analogy because there's not as many moves in poker, so the tunnel vision concept wouldn't necessarily be as applicable. People don't meet a poker player and say like, "Hey, I bet you can like see so many moves ahead," you know? They're more likely to
Yeah.
say like, uh, "I don't have a poker face, so I couldn't be good at the game," or "Do you count cards?" What I think those are the 2 bigger ones, right? But still, unexpected bet sizings can certainly throw people off their game plan, right? Like, they were planning something, and then they get a bet size that really, strikes them, and it rattles them.
Well, I think it also just points to, I think in poker particularly. Well, I don't know how this would compare to chess, but I know in poker, especially in the live poker scene, social norms and what people expect you to do and what's acceptable play a really big part in game flow and the kind of decisions that people do. And if you're, I think it's actually quite easy to find yourself sinking into a strategic, like a culturally acceptable strategy. Like, I think that's pretty easy, where and a lot of people don't even examine it. They don't even realize it. They don't even realize that they're not considering a check raise here, because it would literally offend their opponent to check raise them. Like, it's not even just that like you shouldn't, that like you wouldn't do it. A lot of people feel that you do something that people don't think is okay, or people think they'll criticize it for being bad, but the truth is they just think it just violated their expectations of what should happen. And the unique thing about poker is because it's mixed so much, like so much competitive players mixed with non-competitive players, that I do think you get this heavy amount of culture that is like, there are things you shouldn't do, and there are things that are acceptable, and there's the way this game should go, there's the kind of way this hand should play. And I think a lot of people even subconsciously feel the pressure to work within those lines.
Agree, agree. Yeah, absolutely. Subconsciously, for sure. It's like almost like a default to truth, which probably makes people bluff less live. That would be another amazing study, by the way, to like, you know, kind of examine like bluff rates online versus live, because I bet because of what you said, because people don't want to lie to humans, or and also probably because they're afraid they're more likely to get caught because you can see their physicality. I bet you like a lot of bluff rates go way down in a lot of live poker contexts because of what you're saying. And maybe the problem is a lot of people would just write that off to skill level because, of course, skill levels online are higher. But if you could control for that, I would be really interested to see like if you could actually examine the same types of players, why and when they bluff less in person and on the internet.
I would be interested to see what the averages are for different types of like lines and things, And I bet you could actually see like social shaming behavior when people deviate from them at poker tables, even among pros. Like when there's a pro who's like great, who plays in a very different way from a lot of other people, I think you can tell that a lot of people just like have a hard time with it emotionally, not even like strategically. Like they get annoyed by it. And I think that would be an interesting thing to study. But I think people like are pretty heavily affected socially in all of these ways. And it really is like story based. The idea that also came up to me is how this would differ depending on the context, because you're talking about people would bluff less. But if I know people who play like a lot in like private cash games, and they feel this pressure to adhere to the kind of social norms that's like we kind of play splashy.
Ah, yeah,
And
yeah,
so,
yeah. That makes sense too,
right?
right.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree with that. I didn't even think of that example, but that's like a perfect example where it's like the opposite, where like they would feel bad for like folding a hand if they folded too many hands in a row, even if their card distribution is really weak. They just like, I just have to open this hand. And that's like a social pressure thing. Absolutely. And, some of these social pressures used to be like very concrete, right? Like there were card rooms in which check raising was prohibited. And so part of
Mm.
it, I think, is like, our history. And in chess, it used to be considered extremely rude in the romantic chess era. It would be considered rude if I sacrificed a piece and you didn't take it. So, like, yeah. So
that's a, that's amazing. But like, yeah, I mean, like, cause so much of this is really, it really is narrative though. It really is like the story we tell ourselves about where we are and like what's happening and what's supposed to do. And I feel this all the time because I do not play live very much. And so like I'll go to an MTT and my style of chess play is very much just like I'm just gonna do the thing that I think is best. And like I play very instinctively. But so like I had an example where I called a 3-bet. I was playing a live MTT where like a guy 3-bet me and I called. Board came like 2-3-4. And I was like, this just feels like a board I should lead. Like, I don't know if that's true, but that's what I'm going to do. I think I have like king 6 suit. I have a garbage hand. I have nothing. But I don't even think I had a draw. So I think I had like king 7. I was just like, I feel like I can range lead. And I just proceeded to lead and triple barrel. Like I just led and triple barreled all off, ended up falling by the river. And this guy was like so offended at the line that I had taken at the end of this hand. Like he was like visually upset. But I think to this concept, it taking moves that are beyond what people are like would even consider doing, it just naturally pushes them into a part of the game where like they have they haven't been. They don't know what this is. They don't know what this means. And in my opinion, that's just where people make mistakes. Like that's just where people mess up is like once you push the game, your willingness to sense that like sometimes even the sense that like this would feel awkward to do is a really good sign that's like, yeah, that means this person's probably never been in that situation before if you were to do it, you know?
yeah, I agree, and chess became a lot like that too. Absolutely.
So I can see in my data that 70% of you do not subscribe. It's hard to overestimate how much your subscription helps grow this channel. So if you appreciate what I'm doing here and you want to hear more of it, please like and subscribe so we can continue to bring you more great value and great content in the world of poker. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know how that applies to situations in life as much but I guess I will say in the business work. Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe in the game theory type situations like negotiation, like if you have leverage in a certain situation, you might be able to ask for something like really, um, you know, enormous, that would be considered kind of rude to some people, but if you happen to get a yes, then you really scored. And I think that would be kind of similar to an overbet. That's kind of analogous to that situation where, you're not going to get through all the time, but when you do, you win more, when you have a value case. And yeah, but the negotiation is in a way a game. So beyond other games, it's not as easy to come up with examples.
I was thinking about it. I do think people limit themselves when they're trying to solve problems to situations that squarely fit within one thing or another. And this really goes to like what you're saying, like to do one or the other, when oftentimes like good solutions can be found like somewhere in between or utilizing one of your solutions you have in an unintuitive way. I'm speaking very abstractly now, but I've done some like business consulting and with the people who are, that's one of the things that I find most common with people who are really immersed in their business is they're like so deep in it that they don't consider like just utilizing their tools in a way that they have not before, you know. But like as someone who comes in from the outside, I can just look at it and be like, this feels like this would solve this problem, but I only can see that because I am not immersed in it, you know.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. That's one of the reasons they bring in people bring in consultants to kind of get that kind of fresh perspective, which is so difficult. By the way, to change the topic just for a second, because I'm fascinated by this. Are you a memory champion or a memory athlete, like a former memory athlete?
I was a memory athlete. Where did you hear this? This is not like
I think
commonly
on your
known. So,
podcast.
oh,
I think
okay,
I
yeah,
think the
yeah,
one
yeah.
with Lucky Chewy because he's also really got this really incredible memory. And I'm friends with this memory champion named Yenja Wintersall, and I feature her in
Oh,
my
I
book.
know her.
Oh yeah, she's
Yeah, I
wonderful.
know Yanja. Yeah,
She plays
yeah.
little
Sorry.
poker actually, and
Yeah,
she plays little poker, and she's now into stand-up comedy too.
she's into stand up. Oh man, I haven't seen her in forever. But yeah, yeah. I used to. She was very very good at memorizing names and faces. I think you if you know her well, you would know. Does she have synesthesia?
She actually hasn't mentioned that. She hasn't mentioned that.
Okay.
But she did, we have talked a lot about her win in the names and faces category in the various memory championships, and she's given me a lot of tips and takeaways from it. I actually, cover her in one of the chapters in my book, Thinking Sideways, and I think the biggest takeaway I got from her actually is that before she started working in memory, she didn't necessarily feel like she was that good at it. That it's more of a skill than a talent. Although she is very talented at it, but that the larger part was like developing the skill itself. And also one of the most useful things I got from her is that she just pays attention.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, that and for the little things, because she does actually remember, like, if we hung out years ago and we just had a conversation with somebody and somebody came up or somebody would come up in the hallway, I took her to the World Series of Poker once and she played an event and somebody would like come up in the hallway and say hi to us and I'd introduce her and she'd remember that person years later. And when I kinda talked to her about it and observed her enough times, I realized that the reason she was so good at remembering these things was sure, she had some tricks, like some mnemonics and whatnot, but she also actually just cares a lot. Like, she's just interested in people. And being interested in people helps you remember more things about them. It's, like, so obvious, right? It's like and and how about you? What was your best memory category? Like, what was the one of the competitions that you were best at?
So cards and numbers I was best at. So my so I could do 5 minute numbers around 400 digits. I could do 400 digits in 5 minutes. And then I think my best time for a deck of cards was around 24 seconds for a deck of cards. But so this is what actually part of what prompted me having such a fascinating interest in just performing under pressure is my first USA Memory Championship that I went to. I but right before this episode, yours and I's will air. I actually recorded one with Nelson Dellis, who is 5 time USA Memory Champion, and he'll be the one like right before this episode. So people who will be watching this will have just watched that, or I'm hoping they will have just watched that. But Nelson was there, and this is one of my first competitions, and I thought for sure I was going to sweep the USM Memory Champion, like championship on paper, and I knew all the competitors. I knew I could score higher than them, like I knew it, and I waffled that competition so hard. I was 19, and I had never really experienced a gap between what I knew I was capable of and what I could perform at until then. Like I had never in private and then like being there and like I think I came 45th and I thought I was going to win for sure. And that experience was pretty eye opening for me. That's kind of like there were multiple experiences like this, but that was pretty eye opening where I thought I was going to just do so well. But one of the I did memory coaching for a little too, and to your point, one of the main things I used to tell people, and they used to hate it, was I was just pay closer attention. Like if you genuinely want to remember things better, just pay attention better. Because if you pay closer attention, Ron White had this fun trick for remembering people's names. When someone would walk up to him before he would meet them, he would ask in his head, he would say, "What's their name?" to himself. So
Yeah. Oh,
that
I
so
love
that
that.
when so that when he met them, he's already answering a question. Like it primes you. And I took that from him. I use it all the time. Like it primes you to like dial in. Yeah.
And see how far off you are. I love that. And yeah, like I also like to not ask somebody's name right away to have a conversation with them first. If I I can, like, or just exchange a few words and then it sticks more. But I really like that. I'm definitely gonna use that. Another memory thing that actually really shocked me because sometimes you read these tricks and you just look at them and you're like, "Yeah, that's probably not gonna work for me," is, a one that we've all heard lots about and, I've used in my youth a lot. Just writing things down with pen and paper or pencil and paper as opposed to, on a keypad or your iPhone or whatever. And, like, yeah, sure, it always resonated with me. Sure, the writing that I do by my hand is gonna be more resonant and I'm not going to be able to read it afterwards, but I'm probably going to remember what I wrote down more. Sure, sure, whatever, right? But I actually used this in the NAPT that I played in recently that I got third in. I didn't want to be on my phone as much. Like I really wanted to just not be on my phone at all because I don't know. I'm very sensitive to like the news. So even if I like aren't really checking much. I just feel like if I get a news alert that something bad happened in the world, that can really affect my equilibrium at the table. So I just like didn't want to or a text from somebody with, some kind of bad news, whatever it might be. I wanted to be off my phone like completely, except like maybe on the breaks, right? So what if I have a hand that I really want to like write down to look at later? So I got just like a tiny little night notebook to write my hands down in. And yeah, it's worked fine. And when I went back to my room, like, at the end of the night and, like, started, putting a couple of my hands in solvers, like, to try to figure out what I should have done or just to kinda analyze. I suddenly realized I didn't need to look at the notebook. So it worked so well.
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
like,
yeah,
I thought the effect would be tiny. That's what I'm saying. Like,
yeah,
I'm like, "Yeah, sure, there will be effect, but it'll be marginal." But it was actually a
yeah.
very large effect.
Well, see, and I would argue because this is an interesting thing with writing down. I would argue that in that example, the writing down is not the thing that helped. It was the attention given, right? It was the attention because now you're doing a new format, you're doing a new thing that you don't typically do. So this like there's more cognitive attention to having to write this down. You're writing versus typing, so that takes more intentionality. I say this because there's lots of examples, and there's been a lot of studies on this where people writing things down makes their memory worse. There's if you're in a lots of people, for example, if you're in a classroom listening to a lecture live, your attention is so split between the information you're hearing and the information you're writing down that people on average in those settings, those their recollection of what they learned is worse than people who weren't taking notes at all on average. And so like I think it's I do think the attention really is, I mean, I teach this in my coaching all the time, like attention is your most basic resource. Like any your attention is how you tell your brain what matters in any moment. And for many people who don't know any kind of way to train their attention, like mindfulness or meditation or anything like that, you're really kind of at the whim of reaction of wherever your attention goes in any moment, and it can be really detrimental in all kinds of ways. You can just totally overlook obvious things, and but especially the realm of memory, if you don't know how to attend intentionally to things, then you will likely not remember the things that you would like to be able to remember in the future. But
Yeah. Yeah, and that's true. I remember reading about that as well, that, like, in classes, the students who didn't take notes underperformed the ones who did. I mean, overperformed in some ways than the ones who did. Yeah, that makes sense as well. Although I do feel like this is a little bit distinct because it's not like I'm trying to record every hand being played. It's just like a few key hands. But yeah, that's interesting for sure.
well, I mean, I think it makes sense in your example. I was because you would be remembering better, but it's because you're doing a more intentional action, right? So that you're drawing your whole attention to, and you're not doing it while you're playing, right? So it's not like the hands happening and you're writing it. So it
Right.
would make
Yeah.
sense that yeah, right,
Yeah,
right,
that makes sense, yeah.
yeah,
It would be like someone who went to a class and then took notes as opposed to
exactly.
scoring, yeah.
Right, right, right. And so that probably would help a lot of people if they went to a class and then afterwards wrote down the things that felt important to them. Like then you'd probably remember a lot because you're actually, well, there's another effect here, which is you're running over the memory twice, which would help you remember it. But yeah, I didn't know. That's fascinating. I didn't know you knew anything about memory sports, or it's kind of an esoterica, you know.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm super
Yeah.
fascinated by it now, though, yeah, and, also speed cards, you were good at speed cards.
Yeah, that was the one. That was the one I was particularly good at the time. Like I think at the time I was uh, probably one of the fastest in the world when I was doing it. Again, in practice, I would always choke under pressure, but yeah, in practice, I was very good at it.
So let me ask you, would a poker player benefit from trying to get good at something like speed cards, or would it just be more of like a waste of time because they'd have to devote so much time to memory sport?
Yeah, I mean, so like the idea, the whole system of memories is predicated on one concept, which is elaborative encoding. It's basically this idea that the more piece ways, the more context, the more things your mind has to associate to piece of information, the easier it is to remember, right? So with speed cards, what you're doing is you're creating an image for every card, or for some people, every two card combination, and then that image is way more has way more meaning. So if the two of spades is Hitler to me or something, then that's way more context, way more information than the two of spades is. Or if like 3 4 5 is Pizza Hut or like a piece of pizza or something, there's way more contextual information to that. And then you imagine it in a location. Um, I'm explaining all of this because the critical thing here is what you have to associate to the information, and that's also how you attend to things. For the average poker player, they already have so much association to things that really, as long as you're paying attention to things, you're going to remember it. And it's really probably not worth. I talk. If anyone's listening, we talk about this at length in my conversation with Nelson Dellis. But it's really probably not worth developing any unique system because you're not trying to do something under speed. I've actually before I was doing poker coaching, this is fascinating. I was hired to do memory coaching for a very elite poker player. I'm not going to say who it was, uh, to help him memorize. He wanted to memorize strategy for short deck. So he was trying to memorize short deck strategy, pre-flop short deck strategy. And I kind of told him this from the outset that, like, look, we can come up with a system and we can try, but it probably is not going to be worthwhile. Like, you probably will have something more usable and more context if you just find ways of creatively accessing the information you already have. And he was unconvinced. So we went down the route of trying to create a system for like short deck pre-flop strategy. And sure enough, like a few months in, it was abandoned because it was like, this is way more work and way more like than is necessary. And generally speaking, if you're trying to memorize anything that you are already an expert in, or you already have a lot of familiarity in, the real things you should take away from memory techniques is what memory techniques give you is a system of associations. So you can always go from what you know to what you don't know. So I can always go from a piece of information that is like, I need to know this. So for example, I need to know what this card is. I know I stored it in this place. If I go to this place in my mind, I can see an image and I know that image associates to this card and I can walk that whole train of association. Where most people are fail at memory is they don't create these trains of associations for themselves in normal things. So I just go to try to think of something. And if it doesn't pop into my head, I just feel like I don't have an answer. Instead of being like, well, I know this. For example, what's the worst hand I open under the button? Instead of just being like, do I open this hand? I don't know. I'm just going to guess. You can be like, okay, I can have multiple threshold hands from like hijack and under the gun that I know, and I can have a way to lead to the information about this hand. But to me, that though again, the way memory techniques work is way more useful for people to learn than like any actual memory system to like memorize cards really fast. That was a long-winded answer to your question, but
I agree, and one of my big takeaways from learning more about memory is that the value of a good liberal arts, like history, cultural education, because I feel like it just allows you to have all these reference points and associations so that anything you do in life, you're able to retain more, Like if I know nothing about like the history of China, like if and I see a movie that references it, it's just I'm not going to be able to like remember a thing about the movie or the book or the article. And so if you're that kind of more generalized education, I think is really important. And the 60 time or 40 time Jeopardy champion Amy Schneider has a book where she talks about Jeopardy and remembering like various trivia. And she talks about this in such a beautiful way that having all these reference points, it like makes things so much easier to remember, and it makes all these things in the world kinda connect, and so it can make you, like, happier and more engaged. Especially as poker players, we get to, like, travel the world and, like, see all of these things, and we have more of this, like, kind of general education, we can appreciate it more.
definitely, definitely. I think that's definitely true. It does improve Yeah, you engage with life in a much deeper way the more ways you have to associate to everything. Um, one of the things I watched a video, shifting topics here, but you have so many great insights about so many things that I almost want to like speed run through them because I feel like we haven't touched them enough. But like I watched this video on Instagram of you talking about, I think it was Phil Goffon's quote originally, where he said like, if you're not bluffing enough, sorry, if you're never getting caught bluffing, you're just not bluffing enough. And the to me, what was the unintuitive parallel, which I loved that you made, was between this and just getting told no in like I don't know if it was a business negotiation context or that you were bringing it up in, but I just think this is true across life. I don't know if you can illustrate this point again because I don't want to do it for you, but yeah, I thought this was just such a great point.
Absolutely. I think that in the poker context, we can all understand it to some extent that nobody's a good enough bluffer that they can can bluff every single
Yeah.
time and always get it through. Well, if you do, you're making a ton of money in poker. But therefore, when you fail, it actually is a good sign because it shows that you're trying to explore all the parts of the game tree, right? And obviously there are some exceptions, but in general, it's a sign if you don't have any bluffs in certain parts of the game tree that you're maybe not bluffing enough in those spots. And in life, for sure, I think this is applicable that if you never get told that you're asking for too much or your offer is rejected, that it is not only that you're just doing amazing, but that also maybe you're not going big enough and that you're not, really making the most of the levers that you might have now. That's one thing I really feel very strongly about after, just living and seeing what happens with players and people who are in upswings and downswings in life. I feel like we give a lot of attention to downswings and the importance of resilience and grit, which I think is really, really important. But I sometimes feel like there's not enough attention given to the other side of things. That when you're upswinging, you gotta just really ask for a lot and like go, go, go. Because in our like very, hyper capitalistic culture, like if you don't make the most of your upswings, you might be in a downswing the next year and you're not going to have that hot hand. You're
Yeah,
not gonna
yeah,
have those opportunities. So,
yeah.
I think it's funny, like, the first time I heard this articulated in poker, I think, was when Liv Boeree won an EPT many years ago that kind of, like, sparked her incredible career in poker. And afterwards, she was interviewed, and she was just talking about how, like, she was really obsessed with making the most of the opportunities that she was getting thrown at her right afterwards. So, instead of, like, celebrating and, spending money on fun things, 'cause she was quite young at the time when she won, she must have been, like, 25. Um, she was really, like, very cognizant of the fact that she should hit as hard as possible, and I think that's a really important life to poker metaphor as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think even in ways that my audience always gets annoyed at the ways I make this not purely about making more money, but even in the human element of like, I just think about even asking for things from your personal relationships in terms of your own human like needs as a person. Like, I think it's very normal and healthy to be asking for things from people to like support you and to like just to connect with people and for people to be able to give things to you. And I think people are often very sheepish in this context. And the idea that there's just like an optimal amount of rejection and failure that isn't zero, that like in every domain, I think is just so valuable. Like that yeah, again, in business sense, like if you're always being told yes, you're just never asking for enough. Like, but also if you're never getting rejected by people or even like having friends like, hey, I really need you to do this for me. Can you help me out? If people are never telling you no, like I think it hurts so much to feel like we extend ourselves in that way. It's a very vulnerable thing to do to like ask for help. But like yeah, then you're just like not getting enough help. This one always annoys people, but one of the things that also this brings to mind is the idea there's an economist study that came out that was like if you've never missed a flight, you're spending too much time in airports. And people hate that. Like that people have religious levels of defense of the idea that you should never miss a flight. But it is kind of the same idea. But
Yeah, no, I also that's one that you caught me. I push back on that one because 'cause I'm like, I go to the lounge and I have a drink.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
catch up on some work, like
Yeah.
but yes, that is, like, kind of an iconic one. Yeah. When's the last time you missed a flight?
I missed one fairly recently, actually. I missed one going, but you know what's funny? This is also this points to like not all things we're trying to optimize for like time in this way. Like there are some life events or just like some things for which are just like the stress and like not being there is not worth missing a flight, even if down on paper you can say I saved time. It's I wouldn't. I think if you were like a 20-year-old me would stand to like defend that strongly, but I miss a flight fairly, but it was because I booked Frontier, and Frontier is the most garbage airline on planet Earth. That's why I'll never be. This is me spoiling any chance of ever being sponsored by them, but I think they're just the worst. I think they're just the worst airline on Earth, and I don't know if you know this about Frontier, but they close check-in, like remote check-in, like a couple hours before your flight because they charge you to get help at the counter. So if you do not check in over your mobile check in soon enough, you now are forced to get help at the counter and they can charge you for it. And so, like, yeah, this is insane. This is insanity. But then I showed up. Anyway, I'm getting carried away by the story, but I showed up and there was like a super long line and they wouldn't help me. And Frontier's the worst and I hate them. But that is the reason why I missed my flight
Okay,
at
so
Frontier.
it's not your economist
Mm-hmm.
optimization formula.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. No, no. It was my own human poor optimization formula where I thought I would have enough time to check in and just walk straight because I had no check carry-ons. I had no check bag, so I thought I'd just be good. But Frontiers, they're sure that you're not going to do it. Um, so one more idea I want to ask you about that I love that I don't think is in poker at all, and I think this is in chess, and I think this is a great idea. But it's this idea that like when you have a good idea for like something to do, that this is a really good time to consider a different idea. That it says when the line here is like when you see a good move, look for a better one. But that doesn't quite get at what is here, which is just like when you know you have a good move, it means you can take the time to try to think of a better one. And if you can't, use the good move that you already considered. I have never heard someone use this idea in poker, and I think it's a brilliant idea.
Oh, yeah,
But
me too. I mean, the thing about it is it's like one of the broadly used cliches in chess that people like roll their eyes at because they're like, oh, I heard that when I was in third grade. It's so annoying. But it's actually so great. It's like cliches are a reason for a reason. Because it suddenly occurred to me at some point when I was like coaching my son or a group of kids where I was like, but actually, this is such a beautiful life metaphor because the point is if your pieces are positioned in such a way that you have a good move, then there's a really good chance that your pieces are positioned in a way for there to be a great move. Like, because you've got, like, the potential. And so same thing in life, like, if you got, like, an amazing job offer, there's a good chance that the reason for that, because 'cause you're so well positioned that you could actually use that as leverage and get an even better one, you know? Or and so, yeah, it actually is really applicable. And so this eye roll cliche just turned into something that I feel like is a really great mantra. And again, it's that idea of using your upswings to the best possible advantage, that yeah, when you see a good move, look for a great move.
well, it's also this idea that like having a plan, like, waiting until there's a problem with something before you consider a good idea is basically, and you say this here, but it's basically guaranteeing that you're trying to think of a good idea under stress. But if you already have a good idea, or if you're already in a good situation and you already have a good move, the effect on your nervous system is that you will be calm and you will be relaxed. Like the fact that you know there's already something good you can do will soothe you. And that's actually the best state to be in, to have like a creative insight and to have like an even better idea come to you and to have like, and I just think that's such a powerful idea.
And I do think it's embedded in poker theory as well. I mean, this is part of the reason why position is so powerful, right? Because well, when you have equity, you can check behind. So you have some equity, right? And if you're in position, you can check behind. That's an option, right? Sometimes that's a good option, and sometimes a better option is to bet, right? And so there is that example, I believe, in poker as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also a good idea for the fact that people will, you might see a turn card and think like, oh, this is great for my range. But then people kind of just do the thing that they have a standard thing they do when a card comes that's good for their range, right? Instead of thinking like, can I put in a way larger bet than I would on average? Because my opponent, like if I'm in a three bet pot and there's three to the ace king makes a straight, my opponent never has ace king. Like, how carried away with bluffing can I really get here? And like, what is the best way to like leverage this? And yes, this is a good spot, but are you really making sure you're leveraging it to the maximum? I also just think it's something to like be more aware of your own, again, mental and emotional state. I think it's very easy to feel stressed and realize there's a problem when you're stressed, but it's harder to notice like, oh, I'm feeling great. Am I actually trying to be as creative as I can? Like I feel calm and like relaxed and like I feel good. Am I trying to find as many creative solutions now that I'm in this state as opposed to just only focusing on trying to do better when I'm stressed and there aren't good moves and I'm in a tough situation, you know?
Yeah, exactly. It's all about getting value. I remember when I had one of my first ever poker deep runs at the PCA many years ago, before I took the game as seriously as I do now, I was working a little bit with Darren Elias. And I remember I was telling you about one of my hands and I had aces and I was very deep in the tournament and I four bet. And he was like, after telling him the details of the hand, I think he might have known some of the players at the table. He was like, yeah, that was terrible. I was like, wait, how bad can it be?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
he's like,
yeah,
"Because
yeah.
it's so important when you have aces this deep in the tournament to get the max value, that if you aren't, like, really, calibrating for your opponent's tendencies, you're just, like, throwing away your chance to win the tournament as often." And I that was very eye-opening because I was like, "Yeah, like, this obsession with getting the most value from your good hands, I think is very applicable to what we're talking about," right? It's like, sure, I mean, bluffing is often by its nature going to be, you know, a little bit good or a little bit bad or neutral. Whereas, getting the most from your very high value hands can really make the difference between a great and a good player, to stretch that analogy that we mentioned earlier, or a profitable player and a break even player. And so that kind of always stayed with me, that it was like horrible to forfeit, like terrible.
This is a really, really great idea, though. Like playing your value hands well, because like yeah, you said bluffs are on average going to be like meh. Bluff catching as well, right? Going to be like not that interesting, not in terms of EV. I've looked at players' databases, and if you take any player's database and you just remove aces from it, it's fascinating what the win rate does. Like if you just didn't get dealt aces in the game of poker, for most players, it would actually be impossible for them to be winning. And so this idea, like again, it's easy to overlook in the confusion of all the variants of poker. But like, yeah, getting a good hand and playing it well. To be fair, you can. I think some people can overfixate on this, where they do something they're trying to be too tricky to like play it well.
Oh
But no,
yeah.
yeah, I think it's a fascinating idea though. Just like making sure that you're when you're in a good situation that you're or like, you know what? One example came up to me too is imagine you had someone bet twice at you and you have a hand of middle showdown and you're like in position or something. And then they check, like you're horrified to see the third bluff, right? And then they check. A lot of people will just get that like relief and then snap check, like, oh, thank God. As opposed to considering like, wait, maybe they picked up showdown and my hand's good and I can actually value bet. Like this really good thing just happened to me that I was really hoping for. And like now I'm kind of relieved. And I think a lot of people just funnel that relief into like ending the hand as soon as possible. They're just like, oh, thank God, get me out of here. But that was another situation I think fits this metaphor. A common thread through many of the most successful players who I've talked to on this podcast is the degree to which their community and their peer group has helped them get to the next level at each stage of their poker journey. For a long time, I was hesitant to offer any kind of group coaching service. It didn't feel like the environment where my one on one coaching would translate best. But the more that I've gotten into coaching and the more that I've seen the problems that people have, I've realized that what a lot of people need is exactly that, a tight knit community of people who are all pushing towards common goals together. That's why in 2026, I'm offering a group coaching program for poker players where we're going to get together, set goals, work together, hold each other accountable, and make sure everyone gets as far as fast as they can. Click the link below to apply.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love your story about aces. I think that's an great example for like the value times in your life, the times when you actually have leverage in life and how you have to kind of try to make the most of them, and that it can really change your whole year. I was at a panel on poker at the MIT Sports Analytics Conference, which I go to every year. It's founded by Daryl Morey, and I was on a panel where they asked us at the end of the panel like what our favorite poker hand was, and I think Nate Silver got to go first, and he said aces. Of course, he takes aces, right? And but his rationale was very similar. He was just like, "Yeah, I want to see how everybody plays aces, so I can see how they make the most money."
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. You know what it reminds me of too is when I was so I was in one of I was the first investor in Ruse, the AI
Oh,
chess
really?
solver company.
Cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was merged with
Yeah.
GT. It was merged with GTO Wizard, right?
It was bought by GTO
Okay.
Wizard, yeah, technically. But yeah, yeah. So this was a fascinating example of people, I think, just recognizing. I don't know if this perfectly is analogous, but it's like recognizing opportunity. The guys behind Ruse showed Ruse to 50 people before they showed it to me. And I snap was interested. Like I was in like I think people are too cautious with opportunities. I think people want opportunities to be too perfect and too precise and too obvious, And I saw it and I was just like, I'm in. Like, get me in. I want in now. And it was like 5 months later, we had like 6x our money. So like, it was just like an incredible opportunity, and it was fascinating for me to see how many people had not jumped on it who seemed perfectly poised to jump on it. I think that was very interesting experience for me. But it's something that I've always noticed about myself, that I think comfortability with failure comes with this, though. I'm just fine to swing and be wrong, right? But yeah.
Oh, by the way, I'm not good with that. I'm like overly suspicious. I don't know, maybe I had some bad experiences or something, but I think that one I actually really feel like is very applicable. Like I don't really like the airport one because of the stress and all that, but this one is true, I think. If you've never been shorted or scammed, maybe you're
Yeah,
not
yeah, yeah.
making enough of your opportunities. And especially in poker.
I've been scammed. I have been scammed, so that's good. I thank you for saying that. I'm
You know,
just kidding.
I've never been scammed, and I feel like I'm a little bit too cautious sometimes. Like especially when I was playing open face Chinese poker at the time, I was making videos for Run It Once on it, and I was very good. But because it wasn't really run on the regulated sites, you would have to play with people you trusted. So I was very cautious. Like I really wanted somebody who was vouched because I was obsessed with not getting scammed. And in the end, after the game kind of died, I was like, yeah, I could have maybe opened up a little bit because it's kind of like there's a famous story of a guy who's playing in Bobby's room. He's playing gin rummy, right? And he's playing until like 6 in the morning. And suddenly, like Stu Unger, like wanders over when his opponent goes to the bathroom. He's like, your opponent's cheating, and I can tell you how. He's
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
oh, I will play. And Stu Unger's like, okay, don't play the cheater, play me instead. And the guy's like, no, I'll take my chances with the cheater. And it's like,
That's
yeah,
funny.
that story is something you gotta remember. Like, once in a while, you
Yeah.
just gotta.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's true. I mean, it is true that, I mean, I think that it's so, so I literally was scammed once. Um, it was not, fortunately, it was not for anything insane, but I remember the feeling afterwards that like it dawned on me that I'd been scammed. Um, so someone pretended to be a friend of mine, and yeah, who had a, public facing, existence on the internet as a poker player, so someone could easily find and like create a fake account of them. And then they texted me, and they were like, hey, like can I get money for like something like a Sunday tournament or something, and then I can send it to you some other time. And I'm the kind of person to just be like, sure. And I just sent this person the money. Like I was like, it looks like, it was like a WhatsApp that like it had their photo, it looked like them. Like, but the experience of realizing I had been scammed, it's amazing because it was so embarrassing. Like it was humiliating. The feelings, it wasn't like, oh, I wish I had my money back. I actually like, the feeling was like shame almost. Like I feel like
Yeah,
ashamed of having done this. And I
yeah,
really think that is what stops people from taking risks. Is it's not that like, oh, I might lose my money. It's like, no, I will be so embarrassed to be wrong, you know? And that pain for me, that pain I can like still remember was so much worse than having lost money. Like just like feeling like stupid and like embarrassed and like, that was, I think that's the difficulty, that I think that's the experience people are afraid of.
But that's still good that you feel that because now you can relate to it in poker players. Like, I think it's really good to have these feelings, that are negative once so that you can really relate to them, but that you don't have to deal with them on a regular basis, especially in your line of work. And I do coaching as well, and I've dealt with certain negative emotions, and sometimes I feel really grateful to have had them, because of that. But when it comes to being suspicious, like, I do think sometimes I need to loosen up a little bit on that. Not just like nowadays when it comes to like anybody asking you for anything on the internet, it's good to be a 10 out of 10 suspicious because of how easy it is to fake. So that's actually good to be like super sus. But it also comes down to other types of, trust that in order to like with your investment in ruse, in order to like, be successful, you sometimes have to trust people that you don't know that well and go with your gut instinct. And that's where I think like I really feel like one of my goals actually for 2026 is to open up a little bit and be a little bit more trusting and go with my instincts in that arena. But when it comes to trusting people on the internet asking you for money, be 10 out of 10 suspicious and tell your
Yeah.
parents and your grandparents if you're watching it too. Because I'm gonna tell you, it's getting so bad, you know?
Yeah.
Come up with your secret
Yeah.
words, you know?
That's yeah, it is crazy. I mean, it's going to get even crazier with the advent of AI, and, like someone you're going to, like my parents are going to be able to get called by me shortly, like someone seemingly me, like in my voice, and I've never once asked my parents for money. They would be deeply confused. But yeah, that is a scary thing with AI these days.
Yeah, you need like a secret word or a secret story, something like that. That's yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy that we're getting to a time that is like not paranoid, like that is not a paranoid thing to do, like it's crazy that it's like, no, if you don't have that, you're kind of being naive,
And it's
you know
sad what you said though about shame, and it's good that you can relate to that because unfortunately a lot of these scams succeed because people are afraid to report them because they're so embarrassed. And it's so sad. It's so tragic that like they also prey on the elderly. That's because they know that there's sometimes memory issues and or cognitive issues, and so they a lot of these scams target like parents and grandparents and hopeful that not only will they be easier to dupe, but that they'll be embarrassed to tell their children or law enforcement about it. So I think like loosening that shame is really important because honestly, anybody can fall for these things these days. Any age. There was an article I think in like one of the major mainstream publications. I think maybe it was the Times, where a journalist who covers scams and technology was scammed.
oh wow,
Yeah, yeah,
that's crazy.
and he explains how it happened. And I'm like
Yeah,
and so if that guy was scammed, then
right.
you shouldn't feel that embarrassed. I mean, protect yourself, but, if you wanna share information with your loved ones about how it happened, that's really important. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is tough. I mean, I think so much of it comes down to our culture of, like you're talking about process-based mistakes, right? Like so much of it comes down to our culture and the way that we associate identity with your decisions, and the way people feel like it just means something about you now that this happened to you, as opposed to, but I think that could loosen a lot. Like, as someone who's taken a ton of risks, one of the most valuable things about it is learning that, like, this doesn't mean anything about you. Like, making a decision and it being, people are also afraid of, not just of being scammed, I think, and taking risk, of things just going poorly, and what that means about them to have invested in something that was just a terrible decision. And like, yeah, just it's just that's just par for the course. Like, that just happens. Like, you're just gonna, when people have asked me what they think makes me like able to talk about performance and like what it takes to succeed at things, I always tell them it's like, well, it's because I've failed at more things than most people have tried. That's why, I've just like swung at the fence so many times, that I've learned that, like, it doesn't mean anything. It's just like, it's just all par for the course.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just like staying in the game is so hard for people when that failure keeps coming at you and hitting you in the face, and it's like, yeah, you just gotta keep going, and wait for those better moments where you have all the leverage, yeah.
I actually think most people, were they to be put in a situation where failure was hitting them a lot, they would do better than they think they would. I think for a lot of people, they just avoid finding out, right? Like, a lot of people just avoid even learning that they're more resilient than they think they are, because they're so afraid of failure that they don't realize that, like, no, you could actually go through a lot of failure and be fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
Well, Jen, I think this is a good length of time. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks to you for having me. It's been great. I mean, so many of my friends speak so highly of you, so I feel lucky that we're able to have this conversation in front of everyone for our first conversation.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me which friends and what they said right now. No, I'm just kidding. But I no, I appreciate that. And yeah, so your book Thinking Sideways, is it February 12th? Is that, do I have that date right?
Yeah, that's when it comes out in the UK and about a month later in the USA. And yeah, I'll be doing a lot of posts about it, so I'm sure people will hear about it. And it's available in audiobook, Kindle, and yeah, I'm super excited. It talks a lot about poker as well as chess, so hopefully poker players will find it interesting as well.
Well, I am extremely excited to read it. I have found so much of what you say that I've seen online so insightful and so interesting. So I cannot wait. And yeah, maybe we'll have you back around the time of it launching in the US or something. That'd be great.
Amazing. Yeah. And I don't know if you want to include this, but I also really your post on Instagram the other day really was very moving. So, thanks for posting that.
Oh no, yeah, definitely include that. Yeah, it was. I'm glad. It was moving. Yeah, it was nice to post. It was nice to put out there. Anyone can. It's, I have a public Instagram, so anyone can go see it. So, but yeah, thank you.
I'm very close to both of my parents. Well, my mom passed some time ago, but they were separated when I was maybe 3 or something, and I remember seeing all these stories on TV and movies about divorce being so traumatic for children, and it never resonated with me at all because I was like, "Oh, but my parents are friends," and it's, like, great that, they're no longer together because their personality types probably wouldn't be good living together, but, like, being friends, they're great. And so, I felt like I never really got those I didn't see my experience reflected in the culture and the media, and I think that that's sad.
I really hope that that's true for my kids. So, for people who don't know, I'm divorced and I have two kids, but I really hope that's true for my own children. And we Sierra, my ex, and I have tried very hard to make that be the case. And yeah, yeah, I think it's very great. I know that in a lot of ways, I think it is. It's better for everybody. But yeah, I hope my kids will not have the same experience, that they won't, even recognize that their parents, like what that even means, like that. But yeah, you have kids, right? Before I let you go, you said you have a son.
Yeah, I have
Do you have more
one.
than Do you have more than that?
I have one 8-year-old. Yes, it's amazing, and I write about him a number of times in my recent book, and it's just like a real eye opener because he loves games, he loves math, and it's been really interesting to kind of, talk to him about chess and the different mindset skills in it. And so, yeah, that's been really, really cool. Yeah, but just one.
I have a 4-year-old boy. So what's in the cards for me? What do I got coming? Because he's 4 and he's crazy. Is your son reserved, or is he a wild child?
He's pretty wild. I mean, he loves sports and he loves watching sports, and one thing that really surprised me because, sports have always been around me, my family is hugely into sports, but I've never really followed professional sports until I had a son, and what interested me is how quickly it made him good at math. Like, before when he started watching professional sports, like, his arithmetic became better, he started thinking probabilistically, and yeah, I never would have imagined that, and then I kinda got obsessed with that idea, and I was like, "Wait a second." With all of my work in, like, feminism and, like, making women better at STEM fields, I never really thought about the sports angle of it, that maybe some of the interest level is being swung by that, and so, yeah, it's been pretty fascinating.
That's pretty interesting. That's an interesting take. That's something I would have to think more about. But yeah, I think there is just what moves me about that is just like you're just gonna get better at anything that overlaps with your interests and your passions. And I just wish people would check in with themselves more about, like, instead of being like, oh, I should get good at math, like, why don't you get interested in something you like that has some math? That, like, then you'd be way more inclined to be good at math. But
Everything
yeah.
has math in it. Exactly, though, you're totally right, yeah. Instead of, like, attacking it head on, like, how can we expose girls to math via the hobbies that they already seem to be gravitating towards?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah, I agree, I completely agree with that. Because then I was thinking, like, how sports are pushed more to boys and that this could also be part of the reason that they're also, gravitating more to a math later in life, and that it just really opened up a different perspective for me, which honestly is one of the most amazing things about becoming a parent. And there are all sorts of different ways to do it effectively. And so I feel like that in itself is also kind of another way of thinking sideways, that we don't, obviously every successful method involves a lot of love, but beyond that, there are many, many different paths that can be successful.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I have other questions, but I'm afraid of going down another tangent. So, Jen, tell people where they can find you and where they can hear more from you.
Well, all the usual places. I'm on Substack and X and Instagram at Jen Shahade. And yeah, I look forward to hearing from some of you. And yeah, it's been wonderful, Jared, and definitely not the last time we chat.
Yeah, awesome. All right, thank you so much for being here.